Welcome to Jennifer Packer's exhibition, The Eye is Not Satisfied with Seeing, at Serpentine in London. Jennifer Packer is an American figurative painter based in New York, widely recognised for making portraits and flower compositions which centre contemporary black lives. Jennifer has stated that my inclination to paint, especially from life, is a completely political one. Her work is in dialogue with art history, recalibrating and interrogating the traditions of portraiture and still life. Jennifer makes portraits of friends and family members, of people that she knows well and cares for. She has expressed a resistance to the use of the word bodies to ever describe the figures and the people within her paintings. She has said, "There's an important difference between having a body and being a body. Bodies can be almost anything and are often subjected to mindless objectification or a loss of humanity." The significance of this distinction is something that really underlines much of her work. Jennifer began painting flowers in 2012, originally as a way of grounding herself in the studio in between making portraits. She's even described it as a kind of palette cleanser, as this kind of moment within her practice. Jennifer has been inspired in particular by the quiet vitality within flower paintings by the 19th century French painter Henri Fontaine-Latour and the paintings that she would see during visits to the Met in New York. I think those paintings really prompted her to ask, how can a painting of a bouquet feel more compelling than a painting of a person? How can I feel the humanness of a thing? Jennifer's flower compositions soon began to adopt or develop these kind of characteristics which might have an affinity with her portraits. Both share a tenderness towards the fleetingness of life, and so at this point the portraits and the flowers become entwined, and there's this kind of definite proximity between the two. And the first wall in which you see in the exhibition prompts this idea. The painting Say Her Name is arguably Jennifer's most well-known painting. Made in 2017, she painted it in response to the death of Sandra Bland, who was a 28-year-old American black woman who was arrested for a minor traffic violation in 2015 and was found dead under suspicious circumstances in a police cell 3 days later and largely thought to have been murdered. The circumstances of Bland's death drew headlines and instigated conversations in the US press around the way in which black women are subjected to police violence. And this popularised the hashtag Say Her Name across social media and the Black Lives Matter movement. This funerary bouquet is not envisaged by Jennifer as a stand-in or even as a portrait of Sandra Bland. Instead, I think Jennifer recognises it as a vessel of her own grief and the loss of someone she did not know, a loss that is really unlocatable. So she decided to make this painting not of Bland or about Bland, but rather for her. This yellow painting, Breathing Room, was made for Jennifer's former tutor, Frank Bramblett, who passed away in 2015. This bouquet, in particular, is very unusual. It's untethered. It seemingly becomes one and part of its surroundings, simultaneously emerging, disappearing, and expanding beyond the canvas. It's a radical rethink to the history of flower painting in the history of art, where Dutch artists of the 16th century, who often painted elaborate compositions of cut flowers in very, very tight arrangements, sitting and anchored in vases, which came to represent a transient nature of life as symbols of mortality, of earthly wealth and status. Jennifer is kind of reinterrogating or recalibrating this idea of a memento mori or a vanitas. Vision Impaired is a painting from 2015. At this time, Jennifer was really experimenting with monochrome, which is using just one single colour in a drawing or painting. Here, this painting is characterised by this kind of very burnt aubergine hue. It's through the density of marks that Jennifer is really exploring what is essential to a picture and what can be taken out in terms of information. We get the density of a door, which hints towards an interior, into an interior room. There are elements within the painting and the canvas which fall into focus and other elements which recede and dissolve into the background. With this painting, Jennifer's really saying that we do not need to see everything clearly defined to know that it still exists. The title of the exhibition, The Eye is Not Satisfied with Seeing, really points to how a desire for knowledge through sensory experience and the significance of bearing witness is not quite enough. Jennifer's really interested in this kind of leap of faith that we might have when looking at a painting or an image. the way in which we can fill in the gaps and make up the rest of the image through the absence. This is a portrait of the artist Eric and Mack. He's another friend of Jennifer's and a fellow artist based in New York. Jennifer works with a combination of observation, working from memory and from imagination, but with this very tightly controlled and detailed composition of Eric sitting, legs crossed in a studio, is certainly one that's painted primarily from observation. It's full of objects in the surrounding studio space and is quite a contrast to the monochrome painting that we've looked at called Vision Impaired. In this centre gallery, we encounter Jennifer's drawings for the first time in the exhibition. These are drawings made on paper using pencil, graphite and sometimes charcoal. But perhaps we realise that we've seen drawing within paintings in many of the other canvases in the earlier galleries, such as Toby. We wanted this exhibition to really present drawing and painting on equal terms and without the hierarchy that it normally connotates. And this really echoes the way in which Jennifer talks about drawing within her practice and the importance she places on it. She has described drawing as rarely just a study for something. She wants the drawing to be something that holds water and has a weight of its own, has a gravity that painting can't have, even in its fragility. April Restless is a portrait of the writer and poet April Freely. She's depicted seated in her workspace with her typewriter at her desk. We can see the paraphernalia of her office space. A book with pages clamped, like a bookmark by a bulldog clip, is on the right. We see scissors. We can also see a black and white postcard, which I think is of Michelangelo's Pieta, resting by the typewriter. What I find so interesting about this painting is the way in which space collapses in certain areas, and that there is this give and take between observed representation in the portrait of April, in the modelling of her and the detail of her face and the detail of the still lives, which is kind of countered by the imagination in the painting, where the leg of the desk rests gently yet completely impossibly on April's finger. Blessed Are Those Who Mourn Breonna Breonna is the largest painting Jennifer has made to date, and it was painted especially for this exhibition. Jennifer was really thinking about the images of Breonna Taylor's apartment, which was shared in the media in the aftermath of her killing by police in March 2020. And Jennifer felt this connection, not necessarily directly to the life that was lost, but to the objects she recognised and could relate to her own life or those she knew. What's incredible about this painting is it really connects to the grief of many of the flower paintings and the grief that we might feel towards those that we do not know.